Hi, and welcome to the I Teach Myself podcast. My name is Matthew Miniman, and this is episode 69. What can sports cars teach us about your backup environment? So, sports cars. There are some insane sports cars. I mean, when you say sports car, you might think of something, an Audi R8, which is about $80,000 or starts at $80,000, can go up to $800,000. You might think of other really, kind of high class vehicles like Lamborghini or I don't know, a Viper, Dodge Viper, or you could even go so low as a Dodge Hellcat or whatever. But when we talk about sports cars, when we talk about true sports cars, we're talking about the millions of dollars range, like the Bugatti Divo, the Red Bull RB17, the Pagani Codalonga, or the Rolls-Royce Droptail. These are sports cars that are high performance vehicles. They are they are effectively dressing for the rich. And that's not a really great way to start off a comparison with backups, because backups are something that everybody should do. They are not just for those who can afford the best. But sports cars in general kind of follow a sort of theme. They are high performance machines that require a very good or trained driver to operate them appropriately so that they don't get ruined. On top of that, they also have to have proper maintenance. You have to have a maintenance plan with some of these higher grade sports cars. I mean, even with an Audi R8, the electrical system on that vehicle probably sucks, just like it does for all Audis. And so you have to go and have it serviced every fucking 2 months, or else you're going to burn your hands on the steering wheel warmer or whatever. No personal experience. The other aspect of it is that you can spend a shit ton of money on a performance vehicle. Like I said, you can go into the millions and millions of dollars range, or you can settle for a regular consumer grade sports car. These are all things that are possible. You can prepare a sports car to be just a display piece, to be just storage, just for storage. You can do that. Otherwise, it needs to be driven and tested regularly to keep the internal mechanisms flowing. And if you don't do that, it can damage the vehicle unless you've done this preparation beforehand. And again, if you aren't properly trained on how to drive a sports car, if you're not properly prepared for what it can do and how it operates, you may be in for a bad time. Just like you wouldn't really want to drive a sports car, especially one of these really expensive ones, on city streets. It just doesn't make any fucking sense. You'd want to drive it somewhere where you could really let it loose, let it go, open her up, just go at a pseudocidal pace across a straightaway, instead of having to worry about twists and turns and really testing those brakes. Or else you could just get into a mangled wreck. Anyway, these are all considerations that or things that are considerations with a sports car, just like they are with a backup system. So the backup system, they can go by a lot of different names. You can have a backup restoration. You can just have plain backup. You can have backup and replication. You can have replication and restoration, so on and so forth. These are all just backup. These are all just different ways to say a backup utility or backup system. Your backups are essential to the continued operation of your business and of your environment. Now, that's not to say that in modern, most recent terms where everybody's kind of pushing everything to the cloud, that you need to have your own backup system if the company you're relying on already has that. For instance, if you back everything up to, say, Microsoft, or if you have everything in Microsoft as part of their Microsoft 365 account, and you don't have anything in there that is necessarily mission critical, and or there's nothing in there that you couldn't survive without, then you might not want to back that up. But there are instances where you would want to back that up, and you would want a separate backup utility or backup appliance. To do that, you wouldn't necessarily trust Microsoft to back their stuff up to their own system, just because it's basically having all of your eggs in one basket, or giving everybody the keys to the castle. So really having a distributed system across that is also kind of intelligent, just like you wouldn't necessarily want to have a vehicle, a sports car, that only took the very specific brand of gas or oil or whatever that specific sports car uses, especially if this is something you plan on using ever. Anyway, this is starting to break down. With a backup solution, what you're really looking for is something that will fit your needs. And you can buy a backup system, or you can purchase a backup system that does all sorts of things. So like if you need a backup system that looks at all of your data second to second, and you can restore it on second to second, then that would obviously accrue a higher cost. However, if you need a backup system and you don't really need it to restore backups very quickly, then you can end up paying less and things like that. So these are all considerations for your backup appliance or your backup solution as you plan for it. Anyway, in a backup solution, there are several different ways that you can operate it. And to kind of highlight this, we'll discuss backups and the different kinds of backups that there are. So with a backup solution, you typically configure it to operate on a time frame. So you tell it to back up once a day, once an hour, once a week, once a month, whatever, what have you. You can have a running schedule and configure the types of backups. And so there are several different kinds of backups. And what we configure, so there's kinds, types, configurations, schedules, all of that with backups. And we're going to kind of break this down into an intelligible understanding. So with the kinds of backups, these are the types of backups in reference to what kind of data they contain. And so you can do what is called a full backup, which is exactly what it sounds like. It is a one-to-one snapshot of everything on that system. You can do a differential backup, which is essentially just everything that has changed on a system from point A to point B. And then you can do what is called a transactional backup. And that is basically all of the changes that have occurred from point A to point B, but you apply them based on the layout of the data. The difference there being fairly minute, where a transactional really only has the most bare information about what was changed. And the transactional is also known as an incremental, where instead of backing up the files that changed, you are actually just backing up. You're kind of backing up in steps. So to have incremental backups, you need to, in order to restore incremental backups, you need to have all of the previous incremental backups. Whereas if you have a differential, you can restore from a single incremental, meaning a single differential. If you have a corrupted incremental backup anywhere along the chain, you kind of lose your backups. And so incremental backups, transactional backups, really require you to have that specific backup type, or that specific backup information to be consistent. From there, there's also a mirror backup, and this is essentially where you have two systems that are exactly the same. One is in production, and one is literally just a copy of everything that is happening on that system. And so the reason why you would have this is if you need an extremely high availability system, you need to fail over to that mirror unit. And so, for instance, if you were like, okay, or you could use a mirror system to test backups or to test changes. And then once you're satisfied with how the operation is working, you can switch your production over to that mirrored system and then utilize that for your production, and then work on the original production device to get it back to the same state as the mirror. And basically, that's one of the ways that you can use mirrors. But mirrors are typically, like I said, they're exact copies. They're really expensive because you have to have essentially 2 copies of the hardware, 2 copies of the software, 2 copies of everything running at the exact same time. There's also something called continuous data protection, and this is essentially kind of what I was alluding to with that second by second, where you are monitoring your data exactly as it exists and exactly as it is being changed, and you are effectively creating a library of operations against the device. This has an extremely high storage space utilization because you are literally capturing every change across the system. Now, within these backup solutions and different backups and different ways that different platforms provide, you have the opportunity to do something that's called deduplication. And deduplication is essentially, it's exactly what it sounds like. I'm going to take duplicate data and I'm only going to keep a single copy of it. And the best platforms do this very well. You can actually get like 3 to 5x savings on your storage just using deduplication in general. I had one environment that I was monitoring and doing the backups for that had 175 savings. So that means for every gig of data that was on the disk, there's actually 175 gigs of data that was visible to across the environment. So there's only 1 gig of data written to the storage, but 175 scattered across the actual VMs that were using that data. So that kind of explains the different types of backups. Now, as far as what different kinds of backups, this is in reference to in reference to different types of backups, rather, we look at this as far as things like what we call snapshots or checkpoints, and where you have a full backup or an incremental backup or a differential backup, which are essentially those are backups that exist within a separate entity than your environment. They exist within a storage structure and are controlled and really have a lean method of existence away from the rest of your environment. When we talk about snapshots and checkpoints as types of backups, we don't we really shouldn't consider them backups, but because so many people use them, we do have to reference them pretty distinctly, and that's why I like to pull them away from that conversation of the other ones. But snapshots and checkpoints are essentially points in time where we have told a host we want to copy this virtual machine, we want to copy this specific item so that we can go back to it. And the reason why you don't want to consider these backups, and there's a very distinct reason, is because if you delete the virtual machine, you delete those snapshots, you delete those checkpoints. So it's not a fucking backup, because if you, for whatever reason, need to delete that, it will delete all of your snapshots and checkpoints. Another thing is that with snapshots and checkpoints, you lose some of the ability to back up your environment because of the way that those exist and are presented on the host. If you're using a host-based solution to back up all of those VMs, which a lot of solutions use, then you lose the ability to back those devices up as long as they have a snapshot or checkpoint established, because of the way that the host limits the access to the base image of the VM. Another reason why you don't want to use snapshots and checkpoints is that they aren't really intended for use for long term. They are intended for use for doing things like I made a change and I really need to very quickly go back to before I made this change. It's essentially a save, a CYA, cover your ass sort of, I made a change and I fucked it up sort of thing. You would do this before, like, updating sensitive pieces of software or installing updates to the operating system, or, I don't know, disabling TLS 1.0. These are things that you would do just to make sure you had a quick way to roll back those changes and make sure that you identified all of the potential risk of performing an update without affecting anybody long term. Anyways, I like to call them out. I have to call them out because you cannot use checkpoints and snapshots, or you should not be using checkpoints and snapshots as your backup solution. They're free with all of your hosts and all of that. I understand that, but it is also a very dangerous way to live. It is a very dangerous position to be in, and you can really fuck yourself over if you're using snapshots and checkpoints as your backup solution. So, with all that being said, scheduling your backups is really dependent upon your needs and your risk acceptance and all of that. What I suggest as a baseline best practice backup schedule is that you do a full backup every week. You do a full backup every week. You do an incremental every day, and you have a differential performed every hour if you have the space to do it. Now, again, that's best practices. That provides you with the ability to bounce back very quickly in the event of an issue. Now, retention is another thing you need to consider, because that also affects how much space you use. So in this whole scheme that I've created, where you have these incrementals and these differentials and these full backups, your incrementals, you should keep probably a month's worth of incrementals, unless you have a reason to need those incrementals to go back further. But where you're really going to keep the most backups are those full backups. Those full backups, you want to keep as many as you can possibly keep. I always suggest a year's worth of full backups, though if you can't afford that space, then you probably you either need to separate your time out between those full backups. So once a month. I have a company that does them once a year. I don't really suggest that. But those full backups, you'll be able to go back and restore from when you need it. And then that's how you can operate your backup solution in really just kind of what I consider the best practices. I understand that that's a lot of space to dedicate to your backup solution, but you want that in case there is an issue, especially if you have a very sensitive solution or sensitive environment where your data is your business. Now, if you're just a mom and pop shop with a single server that's really used for storing internal documentation and shit like that, and you could live without your server for several weeks at a time, then hell yeah, don't back it up at all. Don't fucking spend any money on that. Don't waste your time. But the next aspect of a backup solution that you do need to consider is what used to be called the 3-2-1 solution. So 3-2-1 solution for backups is you have 3 backups, 2 on-site and 1 off-site. And this is now sort of, we've gotten away from that sort of backup as technology and as replication has become better and better. I consider this to be put all of your backups into an off-site solution. Have an off-site solution ready. Don't put all your backups there, sorry. But you want to have an off-site solution that is completely isolated and separate from your standard backup environment. And the reason why you want this is because what we find as backup solutions have become more popular and we understand the full breadth and scale of human stupidity and mistakes that occur with IT folk, in that the smallest pigeonhole that we have open for backups can open those backups to being compromised fully and totally. And so in order to avoid a situation where your backups become corrupted because an attacker got into them, you have a full offsite replication platform where it's one way. You only write to your offsite as a result of successful backups being performed within your organization at the primary source. So, all that being said, you want to make sure that you have some sort of offsite backup and that they are completely isolated from the rest of your environment. You want to make sure your backup solution is also isolated from your standard production environment. That should come as no surprise. But when you're designing your layout, your configuration for your backup solution, your needs might be different based on whatever solution you select. But always try to look in and identify the solution that requires the fewest amount of holes to be poked, the fewest level of control that is required in order to get the backup. And also, you want to look at time to restore and cost of storage and stuff like that. So these are all considerations that you can have for your backup solution. But where we probably get the most important aspect of backups is making sure that your backups work. And this is probably the most overlooked aspect of your backup solution and of any backup platform is, how do I restore shit? A lot of people will just set it up and just let it ride and never fucking test any of their backups. And this is a bad idea because, as I said, human stupidity, it surprises us every fucking day how stupid people are. And so if you've configured your backups incorrectly, you want to know before you have to restore from a backup, before it becomes mission critical. And you need to test these. You want to make sure that your backup is being captured appropriately, that you know how the software works, that any changes within the software you've identified, and you know how to work through them. You want to identify all of the things that you can do within your software. And the only way you can do this is by actual use. If you only look at it once in a while, whenever you have to do a restoration, that's a problem because things might change or your backups might become corrupted. and you need to establish control over that process and identify exactly how to perform these backups. And this is, again, going back to our sports car. If you never operate your sports car, the chemicals, all of the fluids that are inside of your vehicle will start damaging that vehicle. You'll actually require a higher maintenance cost in order to maintain that car than you would if you actually drove it, at a semi-regular basis. And you need somebody who is trained to operate this backup solution. If you don't have somebody who's trained, if you don't have somebody who's comfortable with operating this backup solution, it's like throwing a teenager behind a fucking Bugatti. You're going to have a bad time. That Bugatti's going to become wrecked, and a teenager might be damaged as well. Just like if you throw just any IT guy at a backup solution, you may have a ruined backup. You may have a ruined environment. And that IT person is just going to be completely wrecked. You're going to have to fire them. You're going to have to get rid of them because they're useless now. These are all considerations. These are all things that you must do in order to keep your backup solution churning and keep it working as a fine-tuned machine. And you need to make sure that if you're going to have your backups just sit there and that they're essentially just there for window dressing, you're never going to have to restore from them, then you're going to want to prepare for that. You're going to have some sort of preparation for that, either through deduplication, making sure that your space isn't maintained, or having an automated system restore process that tests the backups before they get committed to the disk. And so these are all things that you can do to sort of allow yourself to have this window dressing of a backup. But if you aren't confident, if you aren't competent in deploying your backup solution, you may end up with a backup solution that is nothing more than scrap metal, just like what will happen if you drive a sports car directly into a wall because you don't know how to operate it. Well, that's all I got time for today, guys. I hope you have yourself a great day. Nice.